into the webcast today. We're going to be spending our time to mainly look at the AWWA software. Most of the folks that are in attendance today were able to join for our in-person kickoff, which we held in August. For those of you who weren't, we are going to do just a little bit of a recap of some of the foundational concepts that we talked about in that workshop. But mainly we'll be looking at test driving the software, making sure that everybody's at least a good starting point as you are gathering your data. We are going to ask you to then populate the top-down audit software. So we're hopeful that today's discussion will put you in a pretty good spot for proceeding with that. So really with that, I'll take a quick look at the agenda, and then I'll pause to ask if anyone has any immediate and sort of preliminary questions before we dive in, and then we're actually going to mute all the lines and go through the material, and then we'll open the lines back up at the end for some questions and answers. So with the agenda up there on the screen, let me just open it up, and if you have a question, maybe shout out your name and let us know. And if we don't have any, we'll get right into the webcast today.
I have one, Nancy Sipe with the City of Kingman.
Hey, Nancy, what's up?
I just wanted to know, is what we have here, this audit that we have from AWWA, is it the same that they had the format back in 2015?
2015, yes. The current version that has been out since late 2014. So if you went and downloaded it in 2015, it would have been the current version, which is, and the way you can know for sure is version 5 is what it's labeled, and the prior one was called version 4.2.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. All right. Any other front end questions before we dive into our webcast today? All righty. Drew, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and put all the lines on mute again, and Drew and I some discussion and questions. I will draw your attention, if you have a little GoToMeeting window, there is a chat feature, and we would encourage you to, if you have questions along the way, go ahead and type those in to the chat box, or if you prefer, just jot them down, and then when we get to the Q&A session of today's webcast, we will go through those and share those around. As always, we are available to you, so if you have a question you want to talk one-on-one rather than in the group setting today, just reach out to us after the webcast. With that, let's go ahead and dive in. So a little bit of background, welcoming the participants, the pilot participants that are in this program, but also a thank you to the agencies that are making this program possible, brought to you by WWA and the Arizona Department of Water Resources. So I think we've got some of those folks on the line, so shout out to our folks at those agencies. And of course, as everyone was together in the room in Prescott in August, we know that our 6 pilot participant utilities are shown there. So just a big thanks for your willingness to step out and be in this program. We're very excited. I know that the state of Arizona is very excited about it as well. So helping move the state forward. Quick little refresh on the actual program. This is really just recap. We talked about it in the August class, but a good refresher before we dive into some of the nuts and bolts of the software. Where are we? You are here. It is in late October. We're in the data gathering period. We had our kickoff in August. The deadline, we'll revisit this, but the deadline is in mid-November to get data to us, as well as your attempt at filling out the audit software. Just do the best you can. We'll take that information. We'll use that to prepare for our in-person workshop, which will be taking place in January. That's when we'll all physically be back together. So we'll go over the details of that one more time at the end of the call today. But that's where we stand. Wrapping up compilation, analysis, and essentially the program report in the early part of next year, and that helps to put a ribbon on this pilot program that helps to then maybe gain insights into follow-on activities and actionable items at the utility level. So there will be utility-specific feedback that comes out of this, where we're looking at next steps that are tailored and customized to your utility. So it's kind of gaining insight for both the utility and the state of Arizona is another way to think about it. So that's where we are on the broad spectrum for schedule. Reminder that there is a website that has been developed for the program, AWWAwaterloss.org. It has a super secret encrypted password, which is Arizona, all lowercase. So if you go to this website, hopefully it will preempt any questions you may have, or if you don't see the answer to what you're looking for, we have some features on here such as a water loss forum where you can post a question, and we'll encourage you to use that. That way others can see your question and the answers we give back. As always, you can reach out and contact us directly. There is a quick shot of the resources page where we've got materials available for download, such as today's webcast slides, the free water audit software, examples, and so on and so forth. So we're pretty regularly updating that as the program goes along. So definitely check it from time to time as you're looking for materials. We have found that this is way better than having to go back through your emails and find attachments to emails. And so hopefully you'll find the same to be true. In terms of the schedule, there's a schedule button on the website that keeps up to date on when things are happening, such as today's webcast, the November 17th deadline, the January class, and the details associated with that. All right. Quick refresh on program participation, and I can tell by the roster for who is in attendance to today's webcast, as well as the class we had in August, that we've got great representation from the utilities and different departments. But generally, our guidance on who should participate is those that manage the supply and distribution. In particular, the measurement of the supply is extremely key, because that's a big part of the audit. The starting number, the supply volumes, customer service / billing, handling of the billing data. Certainly, if there are conservation staff that are involved in supporting and managing conservation programs, engineering, and then finance. So this is a broad brush of the areas that are helpful to be represented. We like to say that water auditing is not a solo sport. There's no single department that owns the information you need to really develop an audit and implementing the water loss activities. There's no single department that owns that. It's not just a leak detection thing, and it's not just a billing thing. It's a place where all of these different issues coalesce, and therefore it almost necessitates a team to work together. So that's an interesting outcome that we often observe is even improving team cohesion from the process. So hopefully you'll find the same to be true as well. Quick recap of the concepts that we talked about when we were together in August. These are just the foundational concepts: water balance, data sources, the introduction to the free water audit software. I'm going to cover the terms and concepts. I'm going to ask Drew to carry us through basically a test drive of the water audit software, which is the focal point of our webcast today, to talk a little bit about data sources for the inputs. And again, this is just to tee you up to move ahead and be successful in gathering the data and preparing your first version of the top-down audit, or maybe it's not your first time, but preparing this assignment, the top-down audit that you'll provide to us by mid-November. And then I'm going to take the mic back and talk about data validity, data grading. That is part of the top-down audit process, so we'll touch a little bit on there to orient the folks on the call today. With that, I'll move to foundations of the M36 methodology. Basically, four concepts, 4 steps that we take and we follow. One is utilization of the water balance. When you do an audit, it's basically a mass balance that you're developing, and in doing so, you're breaking a complex problem down into its parts. And so, following that logic, separate total water loss into real and apparent loss, and we'll refresh on what those words mean, and then even further break down into subcomponents, and getting the problem down to its most manageable parts. Keys being that the same tool doesn't work for all of the different components of loss. Understanding the loss profile is necessary. we have to understand which parts are exerting more of a problem than others. And it's never ever just one thing. It's always a combination of things, and understanding how that combination is at play is critical. We also think in terms of volumes, values, and validity. This allows us to understand the magnitude of that particular problem, maybe the leakage component, and even leakage itself has certain types that behave differently. Acoustic leak detection is only effective for one of those types. So we need to understand the magnitude of the volume, the value, and what it is costing us. And validity is the thing that allows us to know if the information, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we do need to know if it's reasonably reliable and if it's actionable. And that's what validity is looking at. So the process of scoring the data and developing a validity grade, taking steps to improve the reliability of the numbers, all of those things are working towards that. So volumes and values are only actionable when the validity is sufficient. With that, take a quick look at the water balance. Again, in recap and refresh mode, I like to say that we've said this before, but it bears repeating. When we're looking at the water balance, we have real losses and apparent losses, and those apparent losses break down into subcategories. Real losses also break down into subcategories, but we don't take that step of breaking real losses down when we're doing the top-down water audit, which is the scope of where this pilot program will go. It will not go further to break real losses further down. We'll talk about that when we're together in January, why you would do that, and what is the reason that that's helpful in deciding how much acoustic leak detection should I do. How does my pipe replacement activities in the capital plan fit into this picture? What sort of pressure management scheme, situation might I be looking at? Those types of things are all a little bit deeper analysis, but we can't get there without first developing the top-down water balance. All of those types of loss, apparent and real, as well as any unbilled and authorized consumption, add up to our total non-revenue water. And just to reiterate, dealing with things at a total level, having a total amount of non-revenue water, in and of itself is fine from a general and broad tracking standpoint, but in terms of deciding what next steps should I take, what action should I take, and what should I do, you have to break it down into these parts. And total non-revenue water is not going to tell you where you need to go. So that's where we dial into apparent losses and real losses. And our cheat sheet tells us that our apparent losses include theft, also known as unauthorized consumption, meters that under-register, and anything that is part of how we handle the data from the meter reading to the billing that could potentially, if it does, result in underbilling a customer. That would be considered an error associated with data handling. In some systems, it's not a big issue, and in other systems, they do have big issue with it, so it can vary. But if these types of losses are occurring, they're called apparent losses because they're not physical water that's being lost. What's being lost is the revenue. So it is an economic loss. And we're very interested in that. I mean, that's a very important part of our water loss control program, is identifying those economic losses and minimizing those where we can. Physical losses, in terms of real loss, break down into three categories. We won't go into this in detail today, but just know that there are different types of leakage at play in your distribution network, and only one of those three, this is the unreported leakage, only one of those three you can find with acoustic leak detection. And that's where some further analysis can be done after the top-down water audit. But understanding these in terms of their subcomponents allows us to really make a plan of action, and that's the goal. Doing a water audit doesn't save you any water. It's only when you implement is where the water savings is realized. But being effective at implementation requires sound and validated auditing practices to get there. You have to know where we're headed. So 3 V's, validity being the driving gear here. We have to make sure our validity is at a point where it's reliable enough. And again, I'm not using the words perfect. We're not looking for perfect data, but we do need to understand how not perfect our information is, and then decide if it's actionable. If it's not actionable, we can take steps to improve it, to tighten it up, tighten up the data, and then move to volumes and values to drive what next steps make sense. So that was a drive-by of our basic concepts that we covered in the workshop in August. And with that, I'm actually going to ask Drew to give us a test drive of the free water audit software and really take a look at the inputs, putting ourselves in the gear of developing the inputs. If there's data that has to be gathered, potentially some calculations that will need to be done, and kind of walk us through that. And then after that, I'll take it back over with discussion on assigning data validity grades to those inputs that Drew discusses. So Drew, I'll pass it to you.
Great. Thanks, Will. Good morning, everyone. Just want to make sure I have correctly assumed control of the slides here.
Yep.
So everyone, when we last met in August, we all had varying degrees of familiarity with tracking our water losses and using the water audit software. So today we want to take a closer look and just get more familiar with the water audit software and some of those tools. So Will has taken us through the water balance and key terms that we should be familiar with when putting together our water audit. And now we'll just take a closer look at everything that the water audit entails. The free water audit software is the industry standard when it comes to quantifying our water losses. And it is tied to the M36 water auditing methodology. As the name suggests, the tool is free to use and easy to access. Now, I know everyone on the line has already downloaded a copy of this, but if you haven't, on our resources page on the ArizonaWaterLoss.org site, there is a link that will take you to the AWWA site where you can enter in just a little bit of your information, and then they'll send you a downloadable link via email. So very easy to access, and the price is right. There are some defaults that are provided in the reporting worksheet that we'll take a look at. We know that some of the volumes in the water audit software are difficult to quantify, so we'll talk about some of those default options there. But in general, there's about 20 different potential inputs that you would need to provide data for in the water audit. But our experience shows us that the typical utility, there are only about 10 inputs where you actually have data depending on how your system is set up. So not a whole lot of information that you do need to input into the water audit software there. So what is the water audit software anyway? It's a tool to utilities to quantify consumption and water losses that occur in the distribution system and the management process of the water utility. The tool is founded upon the principles of the AWWA M36 water audit methodology. So in this section of our webcast, we'll take a look at the water audit software and get you oriented to the tools provided within it. We'll also walk through the core sections of the water audit and the data sources for the top-down water audit. So we'll take just a test drive, open up, show you some of the tools that are provided in the water audit and how you can navigate through and become more familiar and more confident when you're putting together your water audit for the first time. So right now, I will go ahead and pull up an example water audit that we've put together. And you can see right off the bat that this is not a new and fancy software that you have to learn, but rather this is in a Microsoft Excel format. But there is a lot of good tools under the hood here in this Excel file. The first sheet that we see here is the instructions tab. Again, familiar, just like any other Excel file, we have tabs along the bottom of the screen to help you navigate. And there are other navigation buttons that we'll take a look at for ease of switching back and forth for reference data when you're putting together your water audit. But first up, we have just some general utility information, who the key contact person is and their contact information, the utility name, and also just state, and also we are going to indicate our reporting year of the water audit. A couple of different options here. We have an option for calendar year and financial or fiscal year. When we last got together in August, we decided that we would be looking at the 2016 calendar year when we were putting together our audits for this pilot program. But this is where you would make that selection on the instructions tab. A date for when the audit was prepared, and also selecting your volume reporting units. So if we're reporting in acre feet or million gallons, I do not think we have anyone reporting in megaliters, but that's an option as well. And also just some other general utility information for your ID. We have some buttons here to help you navigate through. These are going to be the same options as the tabs down at the bottom of the Excel sheet. Just another way of navigating through. As Will mentioned, if you do have questions putting this together, please feel free to contact us directly or use the Water Loss Forum chat on the program website. But there is some contact information for the Water Audit Software and the development team that has put that together. So we'll take a look at our reporting worksheet. The reporting worksheet is where the remaining input for your utility-specific information will go and where you will primarily interact with the software. You can see right off the bat that some of the information that we have input into our instructions tab has populated over onto our reporting worksheet, our utility name, and the reporting year. So we've got 2016, our calendar year of 2016. Also, you'll see that the units that we provided on the instructions tab have already pre-populated over here. Important to note, if for any reason you have completed your water audit in the units of million gallons and then decide that I want to switch that over to acre feet, over here, the Water Audit Software will not automatically make that calculation for you. So just a tip and a heads up on how the reporting units interact with the data that's being entered into your Water Audit Software, into the reporting worksheet. So the remaining tabs, aside from the reporting worksheet, will provide your output data and helpful sources such as definitions and diagrams. The white cells in the reporting worksheet are fields where input is provided. The yellow cells are areas where they're auto-calculated based on previous inputs. And gray cells that we see over on the margin indicate default options. And you also notice that some of the information we entered, again, from the instructions tab has also been carried over. The display information is something we're all used to. Again, it's an Excel file like comment boxes and drop-down menus and buttons. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of those. Directly to the left of your input boxes is a small box where you'll see these numbers 1 through 10. These are individual data validity grades, which we'll talk about more in detail. But hovering over this box is going to create a display with the criteria unique to the specific input. And it provides a matrix of practices and policies to choose from. And the criteria is also displayed on a grading matrix tab that you'll see down here that we'll cover in a little bit more detail in just a moment. Continuing over to the left, you'll see 2 blue buttons. So the question mark button here is going to take you to the definition on the definitions tab that you can see down here at the bottom. So anytime when you're putting together your water audit software, if you're unsure of a term or what is behind it, you can click on that question mark button. It'll take you directly back to the definitions tab and give you the definition of that term. And to facilitate the ease of navigating back and forth, when you click back on this find button, it'll take you exactly back to where your previous screen was on the reporting worksheet tab. The plus sign on the question, or the plus sign on the reporting worksheet will take you to the comments tab. And this is an excellent area where you can input any information that'll help not just you as a utility for future audit years, but anyone that is reviewing or validating your water audit would help them as well. So some input that would be helpful here is staff that are typically responsible for acquiring the data for that particular input, where that input resides internally at your utility, just anything in general that would help facilitate the discussion and support the information going into that input. Again, for ease of navigation, if you click back on this link, it'll take you back to where you were on the reporting worksheet. On the right-hand side of the screen, we'll see that some inputs allow the option to enter as a percentage or as a volume. So some of those are the master meter and supply error adjustments, the unbilled, unmetered authorized consumption, and our apparent losses down here in the middle of the reporting worksheet of our unauthorized consumption, customer metering inaccuracies, and systematic data handling errors. Again, nothing new that we're not familiar with in an Excel spreadsheet, so we can toggle these options on and off to report as percentage or as a volume there. At the bottom of our worksheet, the overall data validity score is calculated for audits where all the inputs and the applicable data validity grades have been selected. The data validity score is a measure of our overall trustworthiness of the data that's entered into the water audit. It's a composite value calculated from the individual data validity grades that are range from 1 to 10. And finally, we see down here at the bottom these priority areas of attention. And these serve as a guide to the user of the most important areas needing data validity improvement. So that takes us through the reporting worksheet. Again, this is where you'll be spending the most of your time on the water audit when you're putting it together. And there are lots of good resources to help you understand the definition of these terms that we're asking for on the water audit and what goes into them. The water audit outputs is something we're looking forward to discussing more when we all meet together in January. But let's just take a quick peek at some of the outputs here in the water audit software. So we have our performance indicators, and with these, this will show you some of the key performance indicators in the water audit software. Some examples are showing our water losses not only in terms of volume, but we're also starting to see them in terms of cost. Again, these are all yellow cells, so these are auto-calculated from previous inputs in the water audit. And there are, for a few of these, we do have links to the definition tab as well. The water balance, this is something that Will showed up earlier, but as you're beginning to compile your water audit, we're starting to assign volumes to this water balance, and it's really further supporting the mass balance concept of our water balance here. Another great tool is the dashboard in the water audit. So the dashboard gives us a visual representation of both our water balance and our non-revenue water. So on the left side, we see a vertical representation of our water balance. And over to the right, we can see a graphical representation of our non-revenue water. And we can toggle back and forth in terms of both volume and value. So we can see the volume of non-revenue water and also the cost of our non-revenue water and where that is most attributed based on the legend there. So just a quick peek at the water audit, some of the tools to help you get more oriented to the water audit if you are somewhat unfamiliar with that. But now we'll take a look at some more of the data sources that go into those inputs. Because after all, we are asking you to compile your data and complete the water audit in the next month. So looking at our data sources, you can basically break the reporting worksheet down into several sections here that we have highlighted. So we have our water supplied section. That's talking about your source water, the water that you are metering and that's going into your distribution system. Then we're looking at the authorized consumption, and within our water losses. And our water losses are really, that's the difference between our water supplied and our authorized consumption. And then we'll look at our system and cost data. We'll talk about the length of mains, number of connections in our system, and the overall operating pressure. We'll also talk about the cost data, both the total cost to operate your water system, as well as the customer retail unit cost and variable production cost. So each one of these has some additional data sources that go behind it. First up, we'll look at our water supplied. So we're looking at our volume from own sources, maybe surface water, maybe groundwater, and sources that are treated and entering in our distribution system. When we last met in August, I believe that we all were on common ground that no one was actually purchasing their water, but it does have that field there available as well, and also water exported. So, excuse me, jumped the gun on that one. So what does that look like? So we would like to see for our water supplied monthly reports, or broken down in year, per meter, per month, that is recording those volumes going into your distribution system. Again, imported water or exported, if there are already imported volumes, then that may come from invoices from the exporter. And we're also looking at how those meters are treated with respect to testing. The testing practices and the frequency in which that testing occurs. So if you are doing any volumetric accuracy testing and or electronic calibration, some of those test records would be beneficial to assessing the appropriate grade in the water audit and accounting for some of those master meter and supply error adjustments to make sure we have a good handle on the water supplied volume going into our system. Next section is our authorized consumption. So moving from the top down on our way down on the water audit, the authorized consumption, we have several inputs here: billed metered, billed unmetered, unbilled metered, and unbilled metered. So we're really looking at our consumption data here. And again, we're only taking into consideration our potable volumes. So we want to make sure we're excluding any recycled water, for example. But generally, our consumption reports, we're looking at that per class per month. So we can make sure that we are only including what's needed to. And if we do have any water that we're exporting to neighboring agencies, want to make sure that we have this data so we can check to make sure we're not double counting it in our authorized consumption. Our unbilled, billed unmetered, again, when we met in August, when we pulled the room, I don't believe that anyone had any billed unmetered in their system, but if you did, that's where you would capture this volume. Any unbilled metered, sometimes that would be municipal uses, for example, uses at your own facility. And unbilled metered, this is the first time in the water audit where we see a default option that is presented. So over here on the right-hand margin, it's hard to see with this additional pink shading over here, but this is one of the gray cells where a default option is provided. The water audit is based on a national scale, so the default option is 1.25% of your water supplied for unbilled unmetered. The reason it's there for this particular input is because this is often a difficult volume to quantify. However, if you are estimating some of those uses, then that is beneficial and may lead to reporting this as a better estimated volume rather than using the default option. So all of these inputs will bring you to your total volume of your authorized consumption. So moving over to our water losses. Again, our water losses is the difference between our water supplied volume and our authorized consumption, the two sections we just looked at. One thing that we noticed differently right off the bat here, all of the cells in this section are yellow. So these are inputs that are been auto-calculated based on previous inputs in the water audit software. Our water losses are broken up into two categories, apparent losses and real losses. So the real losses are the physical leaks in our system, and the apparent losses, you can see, are broken down into three components here: our unauthorized consumption, customer metering inaccuracies, and systematic data handling errors. Again, over on the right-hand margin, two of the three of our apparent loss input areas do have a default option available, and you have the option to report that as a percentage or as a known volume. Unauthorized consumption, as Will already described, is otherwise known as theft. Customer metering inaccuracies gives us an indication of the percent of inaccuracy of our customer meter population, and the systematic data handling errors helps us to account for any of those data gaps or data transfer errors that may occur in our billing system. Moving down to our system data, this will take into account some of the physical attributes that make up our system. So we're looking at the length of mains, the number of active and both inactive service connections in our system. And we're also looking at the average operating pressure. So we're looking at miles of main, how we're looking at the source data, where we're getting that number from. When we're looking at the number of connections, we're looking if we're pulling that from our billing software and what the basis of that query is. And just diving in a little bit more in average operating pressure, kind of looking at the coverage of our system and how we're actually calculating what that average operating pressure throughout our system is. And rounding home here at the bottom of our reporting worksheet is the cost data. So the total annual cost for operating the water system, all the costs to keep the lights on and keep the system running there in your system. And we're also looking at the customer retail unit cost. So this is the cost that is associated with those apparent losses that we just looked at, the unauthorized consumption, the customer metering inaccuracies, and the systematic data handling errors. And then the last input is the variable production cost. And this is associated with the real losses, the physical leaks in our system, commonly described as the cost to produce the next unit of water. Typically, this calculation is done by taking your primary cost, which would be your cost per power for pumping and your cost per chemicals for treating the water, and dividing that by our water supplied volume. All right, so that is going to take us through just a quick peek at the reporting worksheet in your water audit. Again, there are some other output data tabs in the water audit software that we're looking forward to speaking with you in more detail in January. But hope this is a way to get you more acclimated with the water audit software and give you a little bit more information as to what's behind that data request that we're requesting and what numbers go where in the water audit software. So with this, I'm going to pass the controls back over to Will, and he's going to talk a little bit about our data validity.
Great, thank you, Drew. Pull that back up on my end. And just to round out, thank you, Drew, for the test drive on the interface with the software. I did want to just add just one comment of my experience with the default values, and if you're wondering, should I use them or when should I use them? Generally, we do recommend to use the defaults. If you haven't, for example, if you don't have detailed tracking on your flushing volumes and your fire department usage, it's A-OK to use the default for the unbilled and unmetered input. Long term, we do always recommend that you try to begin tracking those and set a goal for the future to migrate to your own estimates rather than the default. But if you don't have that right now, that's A-OK, just use the default. So the other ones that are a bit harder to quantify, which include theft and data handling errors, we generally recommend just to stick with the default unless you've conducted some very specific studies of those issues in your system. Just go with the default. They're very small volumes, and stick with those for the time being, and that's A-OK. So encourage use of defaults. It's meant to help make this process go and be a bit easier. And as you become pros at this and you get several years of auditing under your belts, you'll find that you get further down the spectrum, and you'll move away from the defaults over time, most likely. But A-OK to be there now. With that, I'm going to go to our discussion on data validity, and this actually will round out, after talking about data validity, we'll round out with just a couple refreshers on what happens in the next 30 days towards our goal of November 17th on uploading your information to us. A quick look at what happens in January when we're getting together, and then we'll get to our Q&A session of today's webcast. So be thinking, if you do have any questions, again, jot them down on your notes there, or go ahead and pop it into the chat box in the GoToMeeting window. And when we get to our Q&A, we'll open that up and we can have some discussion. With that, let's talk about concept of data validity and the process of essentially assessing the validity of the information in the audit. It's a garbage in, garbage out relationship. Garbage is probably not the right word there. It's really, the better way to say that is the reliability of the outputs is a function of the reliability of the inputs. So you can have great outputs from highly reliable inputs, or you can have unreliable outputs if the inputs or even some of the inputs are unreliable. So this data grading process is meant to try to quantify that. It moves it from we feel great about our information, or we don't feel so great about our information, to something that's quantifiable. One of the great parts about that, in my opinion, is that also becomes a performance measure that you can track. When you do your audits, let's say you do it for the first time this year, or maybe you've already had some experience with the audit software, the AWWA audit software, well, you can benchmark and you can say, well, we've made steps each year, and so we've been able to move our data grade from this to this, or over a 3-year period, we've moved to this, and actually document that progress. That is entirely a natural outcome of water auditing, water loss control program, is that the information is not as reliable at the beginning, it gets better over time, and that's a very much a natural phenomenon. So with that, we're going to just take a peek. We're not going to take a deep dive into the actual data grading matrix. That is on purpose. What I want to do today is just to orient you to just the process of data grade selection, and generally what are the guidelines for doing that. And then we'd like for you to, on your own, as you develop this top-down audit, to acclimate to the language in there, and make those data grades yourself. Bring that to what you submit to us, and then when we get together in January, we'll go through what's called the level 1 validation process. And in that, we hone in on interpretation, application of grades, and we strive for consistency across the board with all of our pilot utilities. So we'll see where maybe some of those less than consistent areas were, and we'll look under the hood on that, and that's actually part of the process. It's meant to be a learning process like that. This one is that we're looking at as an example is the 1 through 10 criteria for the volume from owned sources, perhaps your well production volumes, and you can see that the language graduates, and there's multiple criteria in each number. So 1 speaks to how much of my supply is metered and what is the frequency of the testing and or calibration activities on those meters. And you can see a graduated level of rigor, maybe for lack of a better word, a graduated level of activity and rigor on those practices. And in the software, there's some language that you can see up above that says for each input, determine that to select the grade for each input, determine the highest grade where you meet or exceed all the criteria for that grade and all the grades below it. So that's your algorithm in terms of grade selection. We'll take a closer look at the grading matrix in just a moment. Again, not a deep dive, but I did want to point out one more feature of that within the tool that's important for us to be aware. Before we go there, let me talk about the total data validity score. And we're eager to put some context on this. It is out of 100, and think about what our most natural inclination is to think when we see something out of 100 and it's called a grade or called a score. There is this pass-fail mentality. And we talked when we were together in August. Hopefully you remember us preaching a little bit on this, is that it's really not intended to be a pass-fail measurement at all. What it's intended to do is to convey where on this spectrum of 0 to 100 does the reliability of this year's audit fall. And you can see they're broken down into tiers, and based on which of these 5 tiers that score falls in, it essentially gives you context for your next steps. And that's the way to think about it. And so we often get asked, what is a good score? What is a bad score? And our answer to that is a good score is one that just best reflects what's truly happening in the utility in terms of practices in that audit year. And if that's a 45, then that's a great score, because that gives you clarity of where you fall on the spectrum and guidance on next steps. Where should your attention be focused on next steps? A bad score is one that is either sandbagged, lower than it truly is, or inflated, and it's higher than the true score is. What you get when you have a score that's either understated or overstated is lack of clarity. It creates ambiguity, and the next steps become a little harder to see. What are the right next steps for my utility? So the score is intended to be next step oriented, is a good way to think about it. There's no A's, B's, C's, or D's in this scheme. So bear that in mind. Do the best you can to reprogram the scripts that we all got from grade school, and we all have those inherently. With that, I am going to pull up just a quick review. This is again the same audit that Drew was showing you. And what I wanted to point out, as Drew mentioned, each of the inputs has a pop-up box beside the input. It's the little number to the left, and you can read, depending on your screen size and your preference for font size, you can zoom in a little bit and get a little bit bigger, but then you may have to zoom out to get it on the screen. So bear in mind that the language is here. It is also in a tab called the Grading Matrix tab. So this is a spot you can go to read those in their own tab. There is a lot of information there because it has all of the criteria for all of the inputs, and that's why it's called a matrix. I wanted to point one important feature of this matrix out, and we're going to just dial in on, again, this very first input, volume from owned sources, and you can see graduating from a grade of 1, 2, all the way up to 10. We've got this first line which shows the criteria, and we're looking for the highest grade where we meet or exceed all of those criteria as well as the criteria below. Well, in this case, you can see that the 5 is selected, and the feature in the grading matrix in addition to assessing what grade is appropriate today or for this audit, there's a feature in here that it's the line right below, and this is there for every input. It is the improvement-oriented language. If you wanted to move from a 4 or 5 in this category, the 4 or 5 tier, you wanted to move up to a grade of 6, what are some steps you could consider to do that? So it gives very specific guidance based on where that grade is now. Back to my comment about we don't want to undershoot or overshoot the true grade. If you do that, it's not going to dial in on the right guidance to take the next step, perhaps to go to a grade improvement. One last comment about grade selection is that there's nothing in here, and this sometimes comes up, it's a question, there's nothing in here that says you shall, thou shalt, or you should be doing anything. The way to read this is try to capture and reflect what is happening now, and then you can make decisions about improvement steps that you can take. But a lot of times we'll look at this and somebody will look at a 10 and say, this is telling me I should be doing both testing and calibration twice a year. And that's not what it's saying. It's saying if you are doing that, then the grade selection of 10 would be appropriate. But those types of decisions are utility specific, and especially when you get into costs and investments required to move, let's say, from an 8 to a 10 in a category, or from a 4 to a 6 in a category. There's costs that have to be considered, and identifying those. That's where you get to the point that the feature that Drew pointed out, priority areas for attention. What this really means, a way to think about these below, is if you were to make improvements in the data grades for these top 3 categories or top 3 inputs, that would have the greatest impact on the overall reliability and the score for the audit. So this is basically giving you a weighted guidance on what are the top 3 areas you could focus on to improve your score. So it's an improvement-oriented tool, and I like to just emphasize that, because this score is meant to guide where do we look from here, and that's what's key. With that, I'm going to go back to our slides, and we'll get to the last segment before we get into our Q&A, and that is just essentially what happens between now and January, including the deadline in November to get together, to upload the documents and information for your water audit. So let's take a quick look at that. What are we doing for the next month or so? Gathering the supporting documentation, completing your top-down water audit. That supporting documentation, by the way, is the request for it is here. So if you go to the resources page in our program website, AWWAwaterloss.org, and the password is lowercase Arizona. Resources tab will take you to this document here, which is PDF that outlines what specific supporting documents we're asking for. We always say if we're asking you for something that's really tough to get, or you're not quite sure where to go to get it or anything like that, just reach out to us. Let us know what questions you have. Oftentimes, if you can't get exactly what we're asking for, maybe we can talk about it and get something that's a proxy for that, or something that's similar. And just do the best you can. You know, if you run up against a roadblock, let us know. We will work with you. This is very much a meet you where you are type of activity. Point out that there are also some examples of the data we are requesting. That's this file here. Just a go by, and maybe give you an idea of the types of formatting we might be looking for, but it doesn't have to look exactly like that. So don't take that to mean we want you to change up how your information looks simply to match that. But if you are needing ideas in what that looks like, data request examples is a good spot to look at for that. When you do get your information together, we have a upload portal that's on the website for you to go there, find your name, click the file, or click the button, and you can basically browse on your computer to upload those files. If you prefer email and just sending it to us by email, that's fine too. We'll take it that way, but this way is a little bit easier. We try to not put the burden on email wherever we can. It tends to be easier all around. But your preferred method is you choose whatever you prefer. And if you need to go a different route on getting the information to us, just give us a call. We'll work with you. What to do to prepare for our January session? We're very excited about getting together in January. 24th, 25th are the dates for that. And if you forget that, just a reminder, our schedule tab on the website has those dates as well as our meeting times, the meeting location, and all of that information that goes with it. Bring at least one computer per team is what we're asking you. Bring your supporting documentation as well, just as a backup. Again, you'll be giving it to us, so we'll have it, but bring that as well. Any other information you think might be helpful, but for the most part, what you upload to us in November, and I should mention that between November and January, that's our window to reach back out to you if we have questions or if there may be a supplemental piece of information that would be helpful. We might ask you for that, but basically between what you upload and any follow-on discussion we have, that's what you need for this meeting in January, as well as, of course, your team to show up and have a laptop with the team. So that's kind of getting us ready. If you have questions about our upcoming mid-November deadline to get information to us, or you have questions about the upcoming class in January, or if you just miss us and you just want to talk to us, this is a great way to get a hold of us. You can reach us directly, or you can go to the website and go on to the Water Loss Forum. We definitely encourage that. That's a good way for others to see questions that you're putting forward. All right. Hopefully that was not information overload. We refreshed on the concepts for the water balance, the terms of apparent and real loss. Drew gave us a test drive of the free water audit software, the basic parts of that reporting worksheet that you're going to be working with to your inputs. Talked a little bit about where some of this data is coming from. We talked about data validity grade selection, and finally we talked about getting ready for the January workshop. So with that, we're going to enter our Q&A section, and I'm going to ask Drew to unmute. We're going to unmute all lines and maybe ask just to be aware if you do have any background noise wherever you're sitting right now. Maybe just mute your phone from your side. But Drew, let's go ahead. Looks like we're unmuted now. So I don't see any questions in the chat box, so we'll just open it up. And if you have a question, maybe speak up with your name first, and then we'll shout out your question and see if we can help you from there. I'll open the floor.
Hey, Drew, it's Robert with Arizona Water.
Hi, Robert. Go ahead.
Question for you. And I'll have to open up the spreadsheet and see. The other day we started entering in some data just to see where we were, and I noticed some of the data that was pre-filled for you, such as like the apparent loss and real losses. We do track pretty extensive our water used, but it's not billed for production purposes, fire department, etc. So I was trying to enter that value in, but like I said, I didn't put too much time into the spreadsheet. Is there a certain way you're supposed to unclick the already populated amount?
Absolutely. Yeah. Great question, and I'm sure that's one others may have run into as well. So I'm now showing on the screen the reporting worksheet, and so just using that example that Robert's put out there, the default is set here in the purple/gray box, depending on your hue or your color settings on your screen. The default set there. If you want to use your own value, and this is true for all the defaults, these are called radio buttons. They're little circles. You just click the circle to the right or the radio button to the right, and it basically opens up this white box to the right, and you just key your number in directly as a volume. And down below, you can do the same if you want. If you decide to override the default and use your own number for either theft or data handling errors, it would just be the same thing. You just click the circle to the right and then key in your volume in the white box to the right.
Okay, perfect.
All right. And while we're right there, I will mention that this middle box on apparent losses, it's customer metering inaccuracies. It's essentially for your entire customer meter population, what is in the aggregate or in the whole, what is the average inaccuracy? So I'll use easy numbers here. If we have 3% in there, that is like saying that our meter population on average is registering at about 97% accurate. So there is not a default for that. So when you get into the software, you'll see the box is colored red to catch your attention. There's not a default there. So that is a number that you have to provide. If you don't have test data, then it's an estimated number. If you do have test data, that would typically be where you might look to derive that number. Just wanted to point out that sometimes people see the default above and below and maybe assume that there's some default that's built in for that one as well. All right, great question, Robert. Thank you for that. Other questions? Other questions from the group on the software or the concepts or the November deadline or the January workshop or anything that's not politics and religion?
Hey, Will, this is Rob up in Kingman.
Hey, Rob, go ahead.
I got a question on the cost data. You think you could go through that a little bit? I'm not sure, other than department operations budget, what else I should be adding into that figure.
All right, great question. Cost data is actually a very commonly asked about area, so this is probably one that others would be benefiting to hear it too. So, Rob, are you speaking to, about that first line item that deals with sort of a total operating cost? Is that the one you're asking about specifically?
Yeah. I don't know how much to include as far as other enterprise fund, other things the enterprise fund is charged for.
Okay, great question. And I'll answer it by first going to the definition, because I always find that helpful just to refresh. Click on the little question mark beside the input. And here, I'm going to zoom in just a bit. Here we get to these costs include total operating costs. Costs include those for operations, maintenance, and any annually incurred costs for long-term upkeep of the drinking water supply and distribution system. They should include costs of the day-to-day and long-term financing. So if you have debt, repayment of bonds for water-related capital projects, you would want to include the debt service payments in there. Typically, you have your, obviously, employee salaries and benefits, et cetera, et cetera. You can kind of see those. The one that can vary a little bit depending on your financial policies is whether or not to include depreciation. And we usually leave that up to the utility to make that call. So you can see the language that says, depending upon accounting procedures, maybe you're able to and appropriate to include depreciation. The way I like to answer that question, or at least think about it in the right context, is depreciation is kind of a proxy for how much your system ages in a given year. And in some ways, you might could consider it how much money you should be setting aside for replacement costs. And so it is appropriate, I think, to capture something to that effect in this number. Now, some folks have active CIP programs in place where they're spending capital money. This is above and beyond debt service on a long-term loan, but actively spending capital dollars. So if you're doing that, I would tend not to also include your depreciation. It's almost an either or, but there's not a hard line here. Just make that decision for yourself, but you at least want to have operation and maintenance costs, debt service on projects, and if you have overhead such as billing services maybe that are shared between your water fund and maybe another fund, then you could prorate it or do a 50-50 split or something. If there's overhead type activities, you could, but you want to capture that because a part of that cost does go towards operations and billing with the water system. Rob, did that answer your question, or anything you wanted to dive in a little deeper there?
No, that was good. Thank you.
Okay. And you can see the costs should not include anything on the sewer system, or if you have any other non-potable operating costs, you would not want to include that. All right, great question. All right, and another question. I don't see one in the chat box at this point, so back to the open floor if anyone wants to pipe up and let us know you have a question.
I guess I have another question. So for service connection density, number of connect, is there a formula that you guys can kind of tell us you guys may use? Because we can, like the length of mains, we have like 33 miles of mains, and we have our service connections, but then like to sit down and try to really figure out what the service connection density is, kind of, or does that automatically populate?
I'm happy to report that that automatically populates, so you don't have to worry about doing the math on that one. And you can tell that just, and for everybody's benefit, you can tell that because it's colored yellow in the cell. And those yellow cells, I'll go back to the cheat sheet here. You can see that yellow cells are calculated automatically. White cells are the ones that you're inputting. And if it's a purple gray cell, then that's your default box, basically. So yeah, good question, and that's automatically calculated for you. All right, and is there anything else to comment on there? Oh, one last comment just on the total operating costs. To go off of actual figures rather than budget figures is just a reminder that that's looking for actual, not budgeted.
One of the things that we've ran into, this is Robert with Arizona Water, sorry, is that that's, and I'm not sure if the cities have this issue, but like for us, we're a private corporation, so when we look at cost, everything, so Pinewood happens to be in the Sedona system, so everything, I mean, like we have plant time, and power time are easy to take out, like the time coded towards the wells. And we code all of our time, but for us to get like a hard number is very hard because we build everything together and take everything together. We're taking in Sedona, Rimrock, Pinewood, and Verde Valley, 3 different cities, and it's just one giant code. So we're having to go through and get the best amount that we can say, okay, well, this is actually allocated to Pinewood. So that's been the biggest challenge for us.
Actually, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because this is worth noting for everybody. If you find yourself in that situation, we always caution, don't spin your wheels on this one. Don't invest a ton of time. So using that one example, approximations or rough proration would be okay. Let's say you've got labor costs that are really covered 3 systems, and you just make a reasonable basis for dividing that up. You say, well, instead of going through and counting hours, maybe it's on a amount of water sold prorated between the 3, or a physical size of the distribution system. Just use some logical basis for prorating that labor cost to get to what the what Pinewood piece of that pie would be, and then just rock on. Just go to the comments tab right here and note what you did and rock on. But I wouldn't, on this particular one, the outputs are not, there's only one performance output that is hinging on this number, and it's one that's not as emphasized as some of the others. So we just always caution, don't overspend your time on this particular one. Just get to a reasonable number, and if you hit a brick wall, give us a call. We'll talk you through it. So great example there. Great example there. All right. Good discussion so far. Any other questions on audit input?
Will, this is Rob up in Kingston again.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
On the water balance sheets, where it's got leakage, it's got the 3 categories of leakage, and it's not broken down. Is that because we're using the default inputs?
No, the reason it's not broken down is you remember a little earlier in the webcast today, we talked about how breaking leakage down into its subcomponents is not within the scope of this tool. So if it's not broken down, that's just the standard answer. It will never be broken down with just a top-down water audit. That actually is it's something you do after you've done your top-down water audit, when you're determining what are the appropriate interventions for my leakage, and you have to get to a leakage profile and a breakdown of your real losses. But it's a future step. It's not something you have to worry about as part of this. So if you see that, know that it's not a result of you doing something wrong. That's actually going to show up in every one of these water balances.
Thank you.
All right, great question. All right. All right, pause for other questions, and I have a couple things that did come to my mind that might be helpful to mention on a couple of calcs here, but we'll see if there's any other top of mind questions from the group. All right, I wanted to go back to just a quick comment on the calculation of the cost inputs, and that is dealing with, so these cost inputs, you've got the retail unit cost, which is the second to the last, and then you've got your variable production cost, which is the last input on the worksheet. And the retail unit cost, that second to the last one, that assigns a valuation to the apparent losses. In the event that you have sewer revenues, if you're operating a sewer collection system and the bill for the sewer is tied to the measurement of the water, in other words, it's volumetrically dependent on what the water meter says, that means that it's also hinging on the accuracy of that meter, which is a core part of apparent losses. So if that is true for you in your system, you operate a sewer system and is volumetrically tied to the water meter reading in terms of the revenue, then it is appropriate to include the sewer volumetric revenue as well as the water volumetric revenue in this calculation. So I think we talked about that in our August class, but I just wanted to mention it now, because that inaccurate water meters will hit you on the sewer revenue if you're operating a sewer system in that way. All right. Do a quick pause, see if that prompted any new questions, and then we'll go to our closing comments. All right. It feels like we're running third base here, just about home. So the last couple things I'll just mention. One more plug for the program website, ArizonaWaterLoss.org. Password is Arizona, all lowercase. And go here if you got any questions, or if you want to see what's the latest and happening, just to get refreshed. And the last thing I'll mention is the North American Water Loss event that is happening. It's in San Diego, so it's geographically speaking, it's coming to a part of the country near you, and we're doing a concerted effort to spread the word in Arizona about this event because it is relatively close, and it's something that as a pilot participant in this program, I definitely want to make sure each of the pilot utilities is aware of it, and hopefully encourage you to come, but also to share the word with your peers and to spread the word here about the event. It's December 3rd through 5th. It's being hosted by the AWWA in California, but it's going to be just a fantastic setup of, in many cases, case studies of utilities who are all the way from close to the getting started part of the spectrum to they've been at it for 10 or 15 or 20 years and have very mature water loss control programs and auditing and validation and leakage management, pressure management, billing, data analytics, just the whole spectrum of activity. So you can check out the schedule to see who the speakers are going to be and the types of things. But it's open for registration now, and I wanted to give a shout out to that event because it's going to be what we like to say the tip of the spear of what's happening in water loss management in North America, coming to Southern California. And with that, I believe we are still clear in the chat box. And I'll do one last call for any questions, and we'll end our recording and wish everybody a great day and talk to you soon. So last call for questions on our webcast today. All righty. Well, you know how to reach us if you need us, and we look forward to hearing back from everybody next month and seeing you in January. Have a great day. We'll talk with you soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.